My drunken husband humiliated me and forced me to eat dog food in front of all his friends. In that moment, I understood. I either die in this marriage or I leave now forever. What happened next left everyone speechless. The first time Lauren felt the taste of dog food on her tongue, her soul shattered like glass hitting the floor. She was 33, with the vacant eyes of a woman who had cried in silence too many times. She worked folding clothes at a downtown laundry, returning home every day before dusk, with fear planted like a shadow behind her. Her world revolved around two things: surviving and protecting her children. Sophie, 8, and Matthew, 10, were her only reason for not having jumped off the old bridge. That night, when Julian broke her lip against the wall and told her she wasn't good for anything, not even dead, the evening began with the usual tension. The sound of the door opening was her alarm bell. The metallic clatter of keys thrown onto the table, the swaying of Julian's body down the hall, and that stench of alcohol, sweat, and rage that seemed to have permeated the walls of the house. "You're drunk again," Lauren whispered from the kitchen, trying to keep the rice from sticking. "The kids are already in bed." "And since when do you give me orders?" he growled, his voice hoarse, thick, his tongue slurred. Behind him, 4 men entered. They were all laughing, drunk too, men with empty eyes, foul words, and laughter that sounded like knives. Lauren swallowed hard. She felt her heart beat in her chest like an uncontrolled drum. "I can make some soup if you want." "Soup?" Julian let out a maniacal laugh. "Hear that? My wife wants to give us soup." "What is this, a diner, you idiot?" One of the friends, a man named Bob, fat, with beer breath and yellow teeth, approached the kitchen and began to rummage through the pots. He took a tortilla and threw it on the floor. "This is how you serve men," he said. "My wife won't even do this." Lauren took a step back. Her hands were trembling. Julian looked at her and walked toward her, with his violent way of filling the space, of crushing her with his presence. "Or maybe what you need is to be taught how to behave," he murmured close to her face, "like the beautiful little dog you are." She felt his hot breath on her face, and the mix of beer and hatred made her stomach churn. Julian went to a corner where the family dog, an old skinny mutt, had its metal bowl with remnants of soft kibble. He picked it up. "Here it is. A special dinner for you. From the man of the house." The world stood still. The air seemed to thicken like an invisible poison. The men burst into brutal laughter, full of mockery and sadism. Lauren felt their eyes on her back, her legs buckling. "I'm not eating that," she said, barely audible. "What do you mean, no?" Julian shouted, pushing the bowl toward her chest. "You're not hungry? Well, start. Show everyone who wears the pants here." At the end of the hallway, a door closed softly. The children had seen or heard. Lauren knew it. She also knew that if she didn't do it, she would pay for it with blood or screams or both. She knelt down. The laughter intensified. Bob pulled out his phone. Another guy said something about uploading it to TikTok. Lauren closed her eyes, she pretended, she pursed her lips, she only grazed the wet food with her lips, but that was enough. It was enough to break her. "Just look at that," Julian said with a rotten smile. "That's how I like it, submissive, just as it should be." Afterward, the group sat down to drink in the living room. Lauren cleared the dishes, washed them in silence. In her mind, everything was a muffled noise, an echo, as if she had detached from her body. She only thought of Matthew and Sophie. What had they felt? What had they seen? When she finished, she went up to the bathroom, locked herself in, and looked in the mirror. The reflection showed her pale, with dirty hair, hollow cheeks, the eyes of a woman who was no longer there. Then she said it out loud, almost without realizing it, as if another part of her, the one that had been asleep for years, had woken up in that instant. "I either die here or I save myself tonight." She repeated it 3 times like an incantation, like a promise. That night, while the men continued to drink and laugh, Lauren waited. She went to the bedroom. The children were sleeping, hugging each other. Matthew murmured in his dreams. Sophie had dry tears on her cheek. With quick hands, she grabbed a backpack. Clothes for 3. A little rice in a bag, cookies, a bottle of water, money hidden in her shoe. It was little, barely enough for 2 bus tickets, but it didn't matter. She had to leave, she had to save them. She went back to the living room. Julian was snoring. Bob too. The other 2 were watching a fight on TV, paying no attention. She walked like a shadow. She took the keys to the old back door, opened it without a sound. The dog, from its corner, watched her without moving, as if it understood. The street was dark. The air was cold. Lauren put Sophie on her back. She took Matthew's hand. "Don't make a sound, sweetie," she whispered. We're going to play a game where we're invisible. Matthew nodded, his eyes wide and silent. And so they left barefoot, scared, but free. For the first time in a long time, free. They walked 5 blocks to the main avenue. They passed a closed store, a drunk sleeping on a bench, a woman arguing alone with the wind. The world went on, indifferent to their escape, but Lauren felt that every step was a new heartbeat. One that didn't come from Julian, one that was her own. At the bus terminal, they sat in a corner. Matthew fell asleep with his head on his mother's legs. Sophie shivered from the cold. Lauren hugged them tightly. She was scared, very scared, but she also had a clarity that sustained her. She wouldn't go back. Not this time, not even if she had to sleep on the street, not even if she died of hunger. Never again would she allow her children to see her kneeling like an animal. As she closed her eyes, a dog barked in the distance. Maybe it was her dog, maybe a stranger. It didn't matter because that night, she too was learning to bark, to bite, to fight for her life. And even though she had nowhere to go, even though the future was a dark pit, she knew that her dignity had just been reborn. That would be her secret, her silent victory, her beginning. And the story was just beginning. ####a new beginning. The cold clung to her body like a wet blanket. Lauren woke up with a sharp pain in her back from the hard cement floor. The terminal smelled of stale fries, sweat, and sadness. It was a place where people went to leave, where no one wanted to stay, but she had no other choice. Matthew was asleep on her lap, and Sophie was curled up beside her, trembling, huddled like a scared puppy. They stayed there because they had nowhere else to go. The wall clock read 5:42 a.m. outside. The darkness resisted leaving, as if even the sun was afraid to show its face in that place. Lauren carefully got up, trying not to wake the children. She walked to the small terminal shop, approached the counter, and murmured, "How much is a cup of coffee?" The clerk, a young man with dark circles under his eyes and an indifferent look, looked her up and down. $2.50. Lauren put her hand in her pants pocket. She had $2. And with $2? The guy looked at her in silence. Then, without a word, he poured half a cup. She nodded with gratitude. She returned to the corner where the children were sleeping and brushed her hand against their foreheads. "The sun is coming up," she whispered. "Let's find a place where we can get some breakfast." Matthew's eyes slowly opened. His voice was a broken thread. "Dad's gonna find us." "No, my love," she said, holding back the tremble in her voice. "We're very far away. He doesn't know where we are." Sophie rubbed her eyes. Her face was pale, and her lips were chapped from the cold. "Are we going to live here?" she asked. Lauren hugged her tightly. "No, this is just for a little while. I promise." The day passed slowly. They went out to the streets near the terminal looking for some way to earn a few coins. An old man sweeping the front of a business told them that sometimes they needed someone to clean the public restrooms at the station. Lauren went straight to ask. The manager, a man with a hanging belly and a sour voice, looked at her with suspicion. "You got any ID?" No, they took it. But I can work. I don't need a salary, just food." The man scratched his beard, thoughtful. "If you clean them well, I'll give you a sandwich and a soda, but I want them to shine. If not, you're out." Lauren accepted immediately. They gave her a broom, a bucket, old gloves, and a bottle of watered-down bleach. She spent the next 3 hours kneeling, scrubbing mosaics filled with dried urine, vomit, and toilet paper scraps. The children waited outside for her, sitting on the floor playing with bottle caps. When she finished, they gave her the driest sandwich she had ever tasted, but to them, it was a feast. They sat on a bench and shared the bread as if it were the grand prize. Sophie smiled a little. "Mom, this tastes better than what Dad used to give us." Lauren smiled, although inside she felt torn apart. Her daughter's words were sweet and cruel at the same time. They spent 3 days surviving like this. They slept in the terminal, washed their faces in the public bathrooms, and ate what they could. Lauren didn't cry in front of the children. She swallowed her tears, pushing them into her stomach like stones. Only when she saw them sleeping with their bare, dirty feet did her throat close up. On the 4th day, they met a woman who would change their lives. Ms. Eulalia sold caramels and wafer cookies near the ticket booths. She was over 70, with sunburnt skin and eyes so alive they seemed to read souls. She wore a gray braid and a hand-knitted hat. She had noticed Lauren from the first day. "You, child, you're coughing a lot," she said without a greeting. Lauren was silent. She didn't have the strength to pretend. "You have a fever?" "No, just cold and hungry." "Where are you staying?" "At the terminal." Eulalia clucked her tongue in disgust. She approached, knelt in front of Sophie, and stroked her hair. "I can't offer you luxury, but in my house there's a clean floor and blankets. I don't like seeing children sleeping on cement." Lauren hesitated. The fear was still great. She didn't know if she could trust her. But Eulalia's eyes didn't lie. They weren't like Julian's. They weren't like the men who had mocked her while she ate from the dog's bowl. They were tired eyes, but good. That night they walked with Eulalia to a tiny house with adobe walls and a tin roof. It had one room, an old stove and a hammock hung up. It was poor, yes, but it felt like a palace. "You can sleep on the floor, but I have 2 blankets," Eulalia said. "And in the morning, I'll make you hot porridge." Sophie threw herself into her arms. Matthew smiled for the first time in days. Lauren felt a new peace, a peace that hurt. Once they were in bed, Eulalia told them stories. She talked about her dead husband, about her children who had left and never came back. And then, when the children were already asleep, she looked Lauren in the eye. "You don't have to tell me everything, child, but I know what it's like to run from a man. I did it too when I was your age, and I survived. You're going to survive too." That night, Lauren dreamed of a river, a dark river that carried faceless bodies. She was swimming against the current with the children in her arms, and on the shore, someone was waiting for her with a towel and a hot cup. It was Eulalia. ####the unveiling. In the morning, while drinking the thick porridge, Lauren remembered things she had buried. She remembered Julian when she first met him. He worked as a delivery driver. He was funny, kind, and had a deceiving smile. She fell in love quickly, as women hungry for love do. At first, everything was perfect. They went dancing, walked hand in hand, made plans to buy a house, but then he lost his job, and with it came the first screams, then the shoves, then the lock-ins. And when Sophie was born, there was no trace left of the man she had met. "I thought I could change him," she told Eulalia. "I thought that if I loved him enough, he would go back to being the way he was. But he only got worse." Eulalia nodded as she washed some cups. "Love doesn't cure wickedness or cowardice. You can forgive many things, but not cruelty." That night, Sophie started coughing harder. Her chest sounded like a broken little box. Lauren felt a deep anguish. "Maybe it's just the humidity," Eulalia said. "We'll take her to the health center tomorrow. Don't worry." Lauren sat next to her daughter. She stroked her hair, damp with fever. She thought she was failing, that running wasn't enough, that perhaps the worst was yet to come. The next day, while waiting at the health center, a television on in the waiting room caught her attention. The volume was low, but the images were clear. A familiar face appeared on screen. Julian, his mugshot, his full name. Below, a red banner, "Man arrested for child abuse. Investigation underway." ***. Lauren froze. Matthew, who was flipping through a magazine next to her, looked at her strangely. "What's wrong, Mom?" She couldn't answer. On the screen, the reporter was speaking quickly. Julian had been arrested after a mother's complaint whose son showed signs of abuse. It was Julian's best friend. He had trusted him, let him take care of his son. Authorities found evidence, messages, photos, testimonies. There was more than one child, there were videos, and there was silence. Lauren felt her stomach turn over. He wasn't just a woman abuser, he was a monster. And she had slept next to him for more than 10 years. The doctor called her name. Sophie had a severe respiratory infection. Nothing serious with treatment, but they needed antibiotics. "Do you have medical insurance?" No, they took it." "Then you'll have to buy them. They're almost $150. Lauren didn't have it, but as she left the office, Eulalia was already waiting with a shopping bag. She put a crumpled bill in her hand. "Take it. Don't give it back to me." "I can't accept it," Lorena said, her voice broken. "You can and you will. Because children don't understand dignity when they're getting sick. Strong mothers need help too, even if they don't want to accept it." That night, Lauren sat outside the house. The sky was clear. The stars twinkled with the calmness of someone who has never been beaten. She looked at the sky and said in a low voice, "Thank you for showing me the truth. Not just about him, but about myself too." Inside, it still hurt, but that wound no longer festered in silence. Now it had a name, a history, a path. And so, in a humble house, with an old woman as an angel and 2 sick, living children, Lauren began to rebuild what fear had taken from her. The story was just beginning, and hell still had a lot to show. #### the face of the monster. Days later, the subpoena arrived folded inside a yellowed envelope with a red ribbon stamped on top. Lauren read it 3 times, as if the letters might vanish from too much looking. Her pulse quickened. The paper trembled in her hands. It was official. She had to appear to testify in the case against Julian, her husband, or whatever was left of that title now. Ms. Eulalia touched her shoulder from behind. She was holding a cup of hot tea and a warm silence that said more than any words. "You have to go," she murmured. "Not for him, for you, for your children, for all the women who couldn't." Lauren nodded. She knew she couldn't keep hiding. She had to face him, even if it was in a room full of strangers, with her past exposed like raw meat. The appointment was at the main courthouse in the city, an old building with high ceilings and wide stairs where voices bounced like soulless echoes. Lauren arrived in a borrowed blouse, carefully ironed pants, and fear wrapped in every step. There was press, cameras, photographers who shot flashes as if each click were a bullet. Reporters shouted names, showed posters with the faces of children. They talked about a network of victims of involved officials. And in the center of it all, Julian's name resonated like a rotten drum. In the waiting room, several women were sitting, some with children, others alone, all with the same look, broken, defensive, hardened by the habit of trusting no one. Lauren sat in a corner away from the murmurs. Sophie and Matthew stayed with Eulalia at home. She didn't want them to see that place. She didn't want them to breathe that air. A woman with short hair and brown skin approached her with firm steps. She had deep dark circles under her eyes and lips chapped by the cold. She sat down next to her without asking permission, and after a few seconds she spoke. "You're here for Julian too." Lauren looked at her with her soul in her throat. The woman let out a humorless laugh. "I knew it. You have the same eyes as me, the same expression, as if your body still carries his hands on it." "Who are you?" "My name is Maria. I was with him for 8 years. I have a daughter." "I had a daughter. He took her 3 months ago. The police found her with signs of abuse. That's why I'm here, to watch him rot." Lauren felt a knot in her stomach. She couldn't breathe. Maria extended a folded sheet. It was a photo of a girl about 6 years old with pigtails and a blue dress. "Her name is Camila. She didn't talk much, but ever since she got out of the hospital, she screams at night." Lauren felt her heart shrink. Her own daughter had started having nightmares too, crying in her sleep, saying things that made no sense. How far had that monster gone? "Did he hit you?" she asked. Maria shrugged. "Sometimes, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst was when he spoke to me in that sweet voice, that fake voice. He made me think everything was my fault, that if he got angry, it was because I didn't know how to treat him. He manipulated me with pretty words and empty promises. He forced me to eat from the dog's bowl." "In front of his friends," Lauren said, almost without realizing she was speaking out loud. Maria wasn't surprised. She just looked down. "He made me sleep on the floor during my pregnancy because he said a dog didn't deserve a bed." The two of them fell silent. They didn't cry, they didn't scream, but something formed between them, a shared crack, a wound that recognized the other. Suddenly, a lawyer approached them. She had a folder in her hand and a tired expression. "Ms. Lauren Miller, they're going to begin with your testimony. Are you ready?" She nodded. Her legs felt heavy, but she walked step after step, as if she were wearing invisible chains. The room was spacious, with high ceilings and worn murals. On the stand, 3 judges watched from above. A screen was turned on. To one side, Julian, handcuffed, his hair messy, his face blank, his eyes empty. He no longer looked like the man she had loved. Now he was just a wreck. Lauren looked him straight in the eye. He looked away. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "Yes." They asked her cold, direct questions. "How many years did you live with him? Were you a victim of physical or psychological abuse? Do you know of other women he had children with?" Lauren answered everything in a firm voice, without hesitation. She told them about the dog food, the threats, the confinement, the night she escaped with her children. "Do you know if your husband had other properties?" No." "And did you know that your husband had another identity registered in another state?" Lauren's heart stopped. "What? Another identity?" The judge read a document. Julian Martinez also appears as Stephen Rogers in Portland and as Mike Luna in Seattle. 3 names, 3 different documents, 3 tax records. Images appeared on the screen. Houses, cars, names, a children's social program that received donations but had no records of deliveries or beneficiaries. A network of aid that never delivered food, clothing, or medical care. It was all a facade, and the money was used to finance hidden properties and, according to investigations, to pay officials who covered up the abuse. Lauren felt dizzy. All that time, while she was scrubbing bathrooms for a sandwich, he was living with hidden luxuries. Stolen money, broken lives. When she left, she found Maria waiting for her. "You knew about it?" Lauren asked. "No, but I suspected it. He always had cash, and every time I asked about his trips, he would change the subject. How can one man destroy 3 lives and still walk around with pride? Maria looked at the ground. Because society taught him he could, and no one would stop him. A social worker approached them. He had forms and a neutral voice. We need to do a psychological evaluation of the minors. It's part of the protocol, to ensure they haven't been exposed to abuse or severe trauma. Can you bring your children in tomorrow? Lauren swallowed. Yes, of course. That night, back at Eulalia's house, they prepared oatmeal for dinner. The children were playing with a stray dog they had named Fluffy. Everything seemed calm. Lauren went to lie down with Sophie. She was stroking her hair when the little girl spoke in a soft voice. Mom, why did Dad yell so much? I don't know, sweetie. I know, she said, because when he yelled, I couldn't hear the hitting. What hitting? Sophie looked at the ceiling. Yours. When he hit you. I would cover my ears, but I could still hear it. Lauren didn't know what to say. She felt guilty, broken guilty again. She wanted to hug her, but the girl turned toward the wall. Sometimes I wished he would die. Is that wrong? No, Sophie, that's not wrong. Matthew was listening from the other bed. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were shining in the dark. The psychological evaluation was hard. Long hours of questions, drawings, interviews. Matthew was quiet, distant. Sophie cried when they showed her a doll. The reports confirmed what Lauren feared. Emotional trauma, chronic fear, possible onset of childhood anxiety. They recommended therapy, one they couldn't afford. When they left the center, Maria was waiting for them. Her eyes were red. My daughter doesn't want to see me. She thinks I'm part of the damage. She told me I'm just like him. Lauren hugged her without thinking. We're not. What we did was survive. But the trial wasn't just legal. It was personal. Every memory that came to light was another thorn that ripped the skin. The testimonies piled up, victims, evidence, connections. Julian was the epicenter of a hurricane that swept away families, cities, even institutions. He was no longer just a man. He was a sick system, a reflection of everything that swept under the rug. That night, Eulalia sat with the 2 women. She served them black coffee without sugar. You have to decide what to do with this story, she said. You can silence it like many do, or you can scream it so no one else has to go through the same thing. Lauren looked at her. And if no one listens? Then speak louder until the silence turns into noise. The next day, a local journalist, Natalia Zamora, knocked on Eulalia's door. She had read the case documents. She wanted to interview the women. We want to tell the truth, she said. Not just about him, but about you, about what it means to live with fear every day. Lauren accepted. Maria did too. The cameras recorded tears, nervous laughs, intimate confessions. The country began to listen. Social media exploded. Women started writing from distant towns, from emotional prisons, from houses where fear still lingered. They weren't alone. They never had been, even though no one had told them that before. #### a fire of hope. The images of Lauren and Maria sitting in front of Natalia Zamora's camera spread across the country in less than 24 hours. They weren't actresses. They weren't made up or reciting scripts. They carried the dark circles of many sleepless nights, the pain accumulated in their bones, and the scars of a hell that had marked not only them but their children as well. The documentary was titled Surviving Isn't Enough, and in it they told everything, from the beatings to the lies, from the screams to the nights sleeping on the street. The response was immediate. Hundreds of comments. Women writing from distant towns, from emotional prisons, from homes where fear still lingered. They weren't alone. They never had been, even though no one had told them that before. Maria was the first to propose it. They were sitting at the kitchen table in Ms. Eulalia's house, drinking coffee. The news still talked about Julian, about the trafficking network, about the politicians involved, but they needed something more. We can't just stop with words, Maria said firmly. We have to do something, something real. Something that gives others what no one gave us. And what would that be? Lauren asked, not sure if she had the strength for another battle. A house. A shelter. A place where women can come without fear, without shame, without having to explain why they didn't leave sooner. Ms. Eulalia, who was listening from her little chair by the window, murmured in a low but firm voice, "The broken ones should have their own place." Maria looked at her curiously. "What did you call them?" "The broken ones. The ones life broke and couldn't be put back together alone, but who still breathe, walk, raise children, fight. The broken ones who aren't dead, they're just waiting for their turn to heal." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. That word broken defined her, but it also freed her. She didn't have to be whole to be brave. She didn't have to have overcome everything to want to help others. That's how the idea was born. The Broken Ones, a name that didn't hide the wound but showed it with dignity. Natalia, hearing the plan, didn't hesitate. She published a second report, now talking about the foundation they wanted to build. In the first week, they received donations from anonymous people, from small businesses, from women who didn't have much but sent what they could. A young artist designed the logo, a broken glass heart with a flower growing from a crack. Another woman donated an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. They needed everything: paint, beds, stoves, blankets, but they didn't lack the will. And the city, for the first time in a long time, seemed to be listening. Lauren, without wanting to, became a public figure. She was sought out for interviews, for conferences. Her name appeared in newspapers. It was hard for her to believe. Every time she looked in the mirror, she still saw that woman kneeling in front of a bowl of kibble. But she also looked different, firmer, more awake. Matthew seemed to adapt well. He started smiling more. He had made new friends among the children of other women who came to the Broken Ones Center. He ran, painted, told jokes, but something was wrong with Sophie. Lauren noticed it one morning when she saw her arm full of small, unexplained bruises. At first, she thought it was from playing, a fall, a bump, but the bruises grew. Sophie got tired when she went upstairs. Her stomach hurt, she lost her appetite. Her smile faded. "I don't want to go to the park," she would say. "I'm tired." Lauren took her to the health center. They did basic tests. Then the doctor ordered more specific ones. Something in her blood, something didn't fit. 2 days later, they called for them to come back urgently. "It's leukemia," the doctor said bluntly. "At an advanced stage." Lauren went silent. The word floated like a knife in the air. Leukemia. White, invasive, silent, a disease that doesn't scream, but devours everything. Sophie was sitting next to her, drawing with crayons, not understanding what was happening. "And now what do we do?" Lauren asked, her voice empty. "She needs immediate chemotherapy, hospitalization, transfusions, and specialized treatment. But you don't have medical insurance and the public system is saturated. There's a long waiting list. How much does it cost?" The doctor looked at her with impersonal sadness. The full treatment could exceed $400,000. Maybe more. Lauren didn't respond. She couldn't. She just felt the air get heavy, the walls closing in, the world pushing her back into an abyss she had barely escaped. That night, sitting in the corner of the borrowed room, she watched Sophie sleep with her mouth ajar, her small hands crossed over her chest, and then she broke. "Why?" she said to the air. "I escaped a monster. I crossed hell so that now life would take my daughter from me." Maria hugged her from behind. "We're not going to let that happen. We're going to fight, just like you fought for yourself. Now you'll do it for her." Lauren sold the little she had. A ring she had saved from her wedding, an old cell phone, clothes, shoes, everything. It wasn't even enough for the first tests of the treatment. Natalia, upon hearing, organized a campaign. She published Sophie's story, launched a fundraiser. Many helped, others criticized. Social media filled with messages. Some said she was a negligent mother for having escaped with her children without resources. Others called her an opportunist. But there was also love. People sent $20. One mother from Chicago donated her last paycheck. A boy asked that instead of birthday gifts, people give money for Sophie. The donations went up, but time was running out. Sophie began to lose her hair. She vomited. She cried in pain. Sometimes she was delirious with fever. She would call out for her father, even though she barely remembered him. Lauren didn't know how to explain to her that her dad was part of what broke her. She didn't know how to tell her that maybe she wouldn't get better. Maria, for her part, discovered she was pregnant. Her face went numb when she saw the result. It was from one of the multiple abuses she suffered before fleeing. She thought about having an abortion, then thought about keeping it, but most of all, she thought about how every decision now hurt. She decided she would have the baby, but she didn't want to raise it as her own. She would give it up for adoption, not because she didn't love it, but because she didn't want it to grow up with the weight of its origin. Eulalia, in silence, continued to knit blankets for the broken ones. Each stitch of the fabric was a prayer for Sophie. Each blanket she gave was a promise that this story would not end in tragedy. Lauren didn't sleep. She took turns caring for her daughter, writing emails to clinics, looking for discounts, begging for favors. There were days when she only ate hard bread and water, days when she didn't speak, days when she only stared at the ceiling. One morning, Sophie looked at her with eyes full of a strange light. "Mom, am I going to die?" Lauren swallowed. She wouldn't lie, but she wouldn't kill Hope either. Oh no, sweetie. You're going to live because you're stronger than all of this. Stronger than the monster. Much stronger. Sophie smiled weakly. Then tell the monster that I'm not afraid of him. That simple phrase, said with the voice of a sick child, was the missing spark. Natalia recorded it, uploaded it to social media, and it went viral. Tell the monster that I'm not afraid of him. Millions of people saw the video. Donations multiplied. The story crossed borders. A private medical group offered free care. Another clinic donated the medications. The women of the broken ones took turns caring for Sophie at the hospital. Lauren, from the corner of the room, watched her sleeping, connected to tubes and monitors. She was no longer the same girl who ran in the terminal, but she was still her light. Hell hadn't ended, but there was fire on the other side too. And this time it was burning for them. The story continued, and the war wasn't over. But now they weren't fighting alone. Now they had a cause, a name, and a daughter who clung to life like someone grabbing a hot nail to keep from falling. And if there was one thing Lauren was sure of that night as she caressed her daughter's cold hand, it was that she would never let that fire go out, even if it burned, even if it hurt, even if it consumed her completely, because the broken can also save lives, even if they're in pieces. #### the last monster. Judge Arthur Delgado looked at the folder on his desk with dry eyes, but with a soul on fire. Julian's face was printed on the first page. It wasn't the same face from the news, or the one shown on social media. In that photo taken in the isolation cell, there was no fury or remorse, only emptiness, as if his body no longer contained anyone inside. Arthur had seen many things in his career. He had signed harsh sentences, faced corrupt lawyers, survived veiled threats, but this case touched him differently. Ever since Lauren sat in the courtroom and described in a trembling voice how her husband forced her to eat from the dog's bowl while her children cried, locked in a room, something inside him broke. And when he met Maria and the other women, when he read the testimonies of minors, saw the photographs, and heard the hidden recordings, his indignation became personal. This wasn't just another trial, it was a crusade. He spent entire nights reviewing documents, calls, bank transactions. He found contradictions, dates that didn't match. Companies registered under false names. A foundation called Clean Childhood that received millions in donations but had no records of deliveries or beneficiaries, traces of transfers to tax havens. And in the center of that spiderweb, Julian, not as a leader but as a pawn, a key piece, an intermediary for something much bigger. One photo chilled his blood. Julian, years ago, at a private party, shaking hands with the city's mayor. Smiling, complicit. The mayor, a man of moving speeches and a family man face, had an impeccable record. He was the godfather of one of Julian's children. The link was direct, and if what Arthur suspected was true, the scandal would not only destroy careers, it would drag down lives. He summoned Natalia Zamora in secret. They met in an old office at the municipal archive. No one else could know. He showed her everything. Natalia, who had already lost her sense of astonishment at many things, was speechless. This isn't just a network, she said. It's a system with political, economic, and judicial backing. Exactly, Arthur replied. And if we're going to do this, we have to go all in, or they'll kill us. Natalia nodded. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wouldn't be the first time a journalist died in an accident after touching the untouchables. Lauren, for her part, continued to watch over Sophie. The girl, weakened by chemotherapy, could barely speak. Her skin was grayish, her veins were prominent, and her eyes were sunken. But when she looked at her, her mother found something that not even the disease could destroy: dignity. One morning, upon returning from the hospital, she found the front door of the house destroyed. Broken glass, burned papers, the walls stained with black paint. You look prettier when you're quiet. And beneath it, an inverted cross. Matthew was crying, not understanding. Maria ran in with a lamp in her hand. Ms. Eulalia stood at the door in silence. It wasn't fear she felt, but rage. They're trying to make us back down, Eulalia said. Because now we have a voice. Lauren was trembling, not because of the message, but because of the certainty. There was no turning back. Natalia visited them that night, checked everything, took photos, documented it all. We have to bring this to light, she said. We can no longer protect you from the shadows. And if they kill us first? Maria asked. Will it be worth it? Yes, Lauren replied, her voice broken. Because if we don't, our daughters will die anyway, but in silence. Arthur requested protection for Lauren and her family. 2 discreet agents watched the house. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The broken one's foundation was temporarily closed for security reasons. Several women dispersed, others hid. Natalia continued to publish, little by little, each piece of the puzzle. People reacted with fury. Some believed, others said it was all a fabrication to discredit public figures. The threats multiplied. Night calls, cars parked for hours in front of the house. Letters without a return address. Ms. Eulalia, who never stopped making coffee, began to complain of chest pains. She refused to go to the hospital. She said it was stress. What would happen? Until one morning, while sweeping the patio, she fell to her knees. Matthew was the first to see her. "Mom!" Ms. Eulalia fell. Lauren ran. Her body trembled like wet paper. Maria called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived in minutes. They tried to resuscitate her on the way, but her heart had given up. Ms. Eulalia died in the ambulance with her eyes half closed and a soft smile, as if she knew her mission was complete. The blow was brutal. Lauren buried her with a scarf she had knitted with her own hands. Sophie cried in her hospital bed. Matthew stopped talking for 2 days. "She was my grandma too," he said with dry eyes. "Not like in the stories. But she was better." Lauren felt the world crumble again. First Julian, then the illness. Now the only figure who gave them stability. But there was one thing that wouldn't change: they wouldn't back down. Judge Arthur requested a confrontation. He wanted Lauren and Julian to face each other. He wanted to see his eyes, hear his voice, understand how someone so despicable could continue to deny everything. The day arrived. The courtroom was guarded by federal agents. Natalia was recording from outside. Inside, the air was thick. Lauren sat across from Julian. He looked at her, not with hatred, but with contempt, as if she were to blame for everything. "You did this," he murmured. "You destroyed my life." "Your life destroyed itself," Lauren replied. "I just opened the door. You're sick. You always were. No one will believe you. Millions of people believe me. Because I'm not speaking alone anymore." Arthur struck the desk with the gavel. Absolute silence. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Julian, but your expression says more than what you're holding back." The confrontation ended. Julian was returned to his cell. Lauren walked out upright, her body trembling inside. Outside, a woman approached her. "I was his victim too," she said. "I was 14. He drugged me, sold me, then left me in a motel. No one ever believed me. Until now." Lauren hugged her. She didn't need any more words. That night, Arthur and Natalia decided to release everything. Not just reports, but a documentary, a series of articles with names, evidence, testimonies. They were going to break the system. They knew there would be consequences, but they also knew they were on the right side. That same night in the hospital room, Sophie woke up from a long, induced sleep. Her lips were dry, her eyes were sunken, but she smiled. "Mom, the monster is gone." Lauren sat next to her, stroking her forehead. "He's locked up, sweetie. And everyone is watching him. He can't touch us anymore. And we're looking for the other girls, so they'll never be alone again." Sophie closed her eyes. "I want them to live with me when I get better." "We'll do that," Lauren said. "We'll build them a house with drawings, flowers, and beds where no one is afraid." The fire hadn't gone out. On the contrary, it was growing. It was consuming lies, tearing down masks, and igniting the souls of those who dared to look horror in the face. The man with the gavel was not just a judge. He was justice that had awakened, and this time, it wouldn't stop until all the monsters burned. Because even if hell defends itself, the fire of truth always finds a way in, and Lauren, broken and alive, would become its fiercest flame. #### freedom. The news arrived with the cold of 5 a.m. The hospital doorbell rang 3 times, as if fate itself was in a hurry. The nurse who entered Sophie's room could barely speak. Her face was ashen, her lips pressed tight. She looked Lauren in the eye, and her whole body trembled before she uttered the words that would change the atmosphere of that place. "Julian has escaped from prison." The world stopped. Lauren's heart fell to the floor, like a glass vase suddenly pulled off a table. Sophie slept connected to machines, oblivious to the horror that had just risen again. Lauren stood up so fast she almost fainted. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Only one idea hammered in her mind: Julian was free. And monsters don't escape to start over. They escape to finish what they left undone. Maria arrived at the hospital an hour later. She walked as if she were carrying stones on her back. When she saw Lauren sitting next to her daughter's bed, with empty eyes, she didn't ask questions. She just sat across from her. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning. Someone helped him. He didn't break locks." Someone opened the door for him. The police? We don't know. Maria looked out the window. The sunrise was tainted with gray. The shadows seemed to lengthen more than usual. I'm leaving the country, she said in a low voice. I've already spoken with an NGO in Chile. They'll take us in there. Camila is ready. We're leaving tomorrow. Lauren didn't answer. The idea of leaving, of escaping, of carrying bags full of fear again, suffocated her. You should do the same, Maria insisted. You still can before it's too late. No. If I run, I'll never feel free. I'd rather die facing him than live running again. Maria didn't argue. She no longer had the energy to convince anyone. She left a folder with contacts, addresses, and security information, and then she left without hugs, without goodbyes, because goodbyes are luxuries that women marked by terror no longer allow themselves. The authorities announced a nationwide search, but everyone knew it meant nothing. Julian knew routes, hiding places, he had contacts, he was like a ghost. The problem wasn't finding him. The problem was not knowing when he would appear. In the following days, strange reports began to arrive. People said they had seen him at the terminal. A nurse swore she heard him murmur Lauren's name in the parking lot. Another witness said he saw him near an abandoned church. The police investigated but found nothing. Lauren didn't speak, she didn't eat. She sat next to Sophie, who was still weak but stable, and read her stories. Every word was a struggle, every page was a war. One morning she woke up startled. She had the feeling that someone was watching her. There was no one in the room, but she found a black flower on the pillow. A fabric flower, one she herself had worn years ago in her hair during a wedding. Julian had kept it, and now he was giving it back to her. Natalia demanded an immediate transfer. Judge Arthur showed up personally. It was no longer just a legal matter. It was a manhunt. We're getting you out of here, Arthur said, looking at Lauren with a firm gaze. It's no longer a request, it's an order. She looked at Sophie. If they move her, she could get worse. And if they don't move her, they could kill her. That same day, they were relocated to a private clinic under another name on the outskirts of the city. 3 patrol cars escorted them. Lauren didn't speak during the drive. She just held her daughter's hand, as if by squeezing it, she could protect her from the whole world. 3 days passed without news, 3 days of tense calm. Then the call came. Julian had been found dead in a rundown motel at mile marker 41 on the Southern Highway. He had taken his own life with a rope tied to the shower. He left no witnesses, only a letter. The police gave the letter to Arthur. He read it first, then shared it with Natalia, then with Lauren. It was a detailed, cold, sickeningly meticulous confession. It described his crimes, the names, the dates, the lies. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he didn't justify anything, he just wrote one phrase at the end, a phrase that seemed written in dried blood. I didn't know how to love because I never learned to feel loved. Lauren let the letter fall. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't break. She just closed her eyes. It doesn't matter how he died, she said afterward. What matters is that he can't kill anymore. The newspapers exploded, social media went ablaze. An event was organized in honor of the victims. The broken ones reopened their doors. Now they were stronger, more organized, with international support. The stories of Lauren and Maria were translated into other languages. They were invited to forums, schools, conferences. Sophie was getting better little by little. Her hair was starting to grow back. Matthew drew nonstop. Natalia was writing a book. Arthur resigned from his position as a judge to create a foundation for legal support for victims of violence. The last monster was dead, but they didn't celebrate because they knew he wasn't the only one. He was just the most visible face of a deeper social sickness. Lauren sat watching her daughter sleep one night and thought that there was still so much to do. But for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt peace. And in that peace, she found what she had been looking for her whole life, freedom. Although broken with scars, but hers, completely hers. ####a new chapter. Lauren got used to the silence of the hospital, to the soft alarms of the monitors, to the constant murmur of nurses walking down the hallways, to the distant smell of alcohol. She became part of that ecosystem, as if pain and hope had turned her into a new species. She was not the woman who arrived broken with 2 children at the terminal. She was not the beaten wife who bowed her head. Now she walked with her shoulders straight, with a scar in every corner of her soul, but standing. Because sometimes living hurts more than dying, but you still choose to live. Sophie had resisted beyond what was expected. Her small body, wounded by leukemia, kept fighting. There were bad days, days without color, without laughter, without words, but there were also moments of light, small victories, a smile, a walk down the hallway, a weak laugh while watching cartoons with Matthew. The hospital became their second home, and the staff became a second family. Matthew drew more than ever. Every drawing was a story. A universe where girls escaped from dark castles, where monsters ended up locked in cages made of words. He drew his mother as a warrior, Sophie with a crown of flowers, and himself as a shield. Lauren found solace in these drawings. Because they were proof that despite the horror, her children still dreamed, and despite the pain, they were still alive. Natalia visited often. She brought cookies, books, movies, and also good news. Her report on the broken ones had been nominated for a national award. She hadn't expected it. She just wrote it to tell the truth, so that Lauren's story, and that of so many others, wouldn't be buried in a judicial file. The day she won, they celebrated with rice pudding in the hospital room. Natalia showed up with a tired smile and bright eyes. She handed the trophy to Sophie. "This is yours, champ," she said, "because you made the world listen." Sophie caressed the metal statue with her thin fingers. She looked at her mother. "So I'm famous?" "Much more than famous," Natalia said. "You're a hope with a name." What no one expected was Natalia's gesture. She then publicly announced that she was donating the entire prize, including the scholarship and sponsorship funds, to the hospital that treated children with chronic illnesses without resources. Her speech was brief and brutal. "I don't want awards, I want lives saved. And if this money can help just one more Sophie, it will have been worth it." The news went viral. More donations, more support, more eyes on the broken ones, which was already starting to open new branches in other states. The echo of that story born of horror had become a chain of fire that was beginning to embrace women silenced for generations. Lauren received a call from a foundation in Canada. They offered to include Sophie in an experimental treatment. It wasn't a guaranteed cure. There were no guarantees, but it was an opportunity. They offered to cover all expenses if she signed the papers and traveled in less than a week. Her soul trembled, not because of the trip, but because after so much hell, the idea of something good felt suspicious. Still, she accepted, because mothers don't hesitate when it comes to saving their daughters. That night she packed the little they had. Natalia accompanied them to the airport. Matthew cried in silence. He didn't want to leave his new friends, but he understood that's how life is. Moving, giving up, starting over. The plane took off under a clear sky. Sophie slept on Lauren's shoulder with a little blanket, knitted by the women of the foundation. Each stitch of yarn contained a piece of history, a prayer, a hope. In Canada, the hospital was huge, white cold, but human. The doctors spoke with a tenderness that knew no borders. Sophie began the treatment on the third day. Her body resisted it better than expected. There was pain, yes, side effects, days of crying, but there was also progress, slow improvements, clinical data that gave them hope. Matthew started classes in a small bilingual school. He made drawings to send to the other girls from the broken ones. Each letter was a seed, a bridge. For the first time, Lauren had time for herself, and in that empty time, memories came, not of the beatings, those were already burned away. Her childhood memories came, of when she wanted to be a teacher, of when she used to play at writing stories, of when her mother was still alive and would comb her hair in front of the mirror. She began to write short stories. Stories of women who didn't wait to be rescued, of girls who grew up among ruins but learned to bloom. Natalia read them. She told her she should publish them. Words are like the fire that saved you. Use them. A small publisher became interested. Lauren published her first book under a pseudonym, The Letters of a Broken Woman. The prologue read, "We were not saved by heroes. We saved ourselves. And that is more powerful than any happy ending." The book circulated through schools, libraries, and workshops for survivors. It was translated into English. It accompanied campaigns against domestic violence. Her voice, which was once forced to scream in silence, was now being read by hundreds of women who found solace in her lines. Sophie was still in treatment. Some days she felt better, others not so much, but she smiled more. She laughed out loud. Sometimes, when she was in pain, she would say to her mother, "Don't be scared. I know the body gets tired, but my soul won't." Matthew, hearing her, always replied, "You're not weak, you're just resting before you fly again." And Lauren would look at those two children of hers and understand why she never gave up. Because they were the fire, because even among the ashes their light still burned. Months passed, then a year. Sophie went into remission. It wasn't a total cure, but it was life, it was possibility, it was tomorrow. They returned to the U.S. not with fear, but with strength. The broken ones now had a national headquarters. Natalia was leading a media program for girls. Arthur, the former judge, was giving conferences on human-centered justice. Maria, from Chile, was sending letters to other women. She had had her baby. She named him Luke, and although she gave him up for adoption, she knew her story was just beginning. Lauren walked through the central headquarters of the foundation. She watched the women sewing, cooking, writing. Girls running in the yard, boys painting murals, and she stopped at the entrance where a phrase embroidered on a blanket hung. Here we don't heal with forgetting. We heal with truth. Every letter was embroidered by women who were no longer silent. Sophie started giving talks at schools. Small, skinny, with a sweet voice, she spoke about how she survived an invisible monster and always said one phrase that everyone repeated afterward. There is no pain that lasts longer than your desire to live. And then everyone applauded, some cried, others hugged, but no one remained silent. Lauren watched from the back. She was no longer afraid because she understood something that had taken her years to discover. It wasn't necessary to be whole to shine. It wasn't necessary to have forgotten to heal. Sometimes ruins are necessary for something stronger to grow. The fire that consumed her didn't kill her. It transformed her. And now she walked on those embers, leaving footprints so others wouldn't get lost. Because being alive, even if broken, is a form of victory. Because love, when it's free, rebuilds. And because the truth spoken without fear not only liberates, it also saves. The story didn't end with justice. It didn't close with a sentence. It had no background music or final applause because real life isn't a movie. But in the midst of chaos, of illness, of mourning, of betrayals, of fears, of silences, something more powerful emerged, a voice, a fire, a purpose. And that was more than enough to start over, to breathe again and to love again, even with wounds, even with scars, because in the end Lauren understood it. She was alive, although broken, but alive and free forever.